this whole ordeal has been overwhelming for me. And I was not driven by anger the whole time. And I'm more than driven by anger now. I'm even more driven than by my sense of injustice or justice. I've had the identity of the little guy for a long time, and there are lots of little guys out there. And I think looking at yourself like that is a detriment. And so after some victories against some entities larger than myself in my life, I decided that I wasn't going to take shit from anybody, and it's made my life a little bit harder, especially when they want to brand you as a problem with authority. Well, I don't see authority, so I don't see how that can be there. But the fact of the matter is I have lots of opposition, and they all are giants. And I've found that your greatest strength when facing giants is their underestimation of you. And so as long as you don't underestimate yourself, think things through, have a plan, know your enemy, there's no reason you can't win. As you listen to my story, you'll be watching videos and seeing pictures of myself and my family and the people important to me. Also, I'll be playing clips to coincide with the narrative or the dialogue there. Those are both from the civil and criminal cases. I'll kind of explain them as we go. I want you to identify with who I am, but again, that's not as important as knowing I represent every man, and that if this could happen to me, then this could happen to you. As you read the Silver Bullet segment, and please read it in its entirety, as it gives you the best explanation of what I'm trying to get across to you. But as you read it, I am going to be playing a clip from an interview of it's my defense attorney just after I fired Sunshine Poliquin. This is Tim Hall interviewing Detective Jeff Ward, who is responsible for the charges against me, my arrest, and the investigation that didn't happen. It makes me sick every time I listen to it, but here you are.
Incident, you didn't investigate whether or not Mr. Strickland was even at the house at that time?
Very long pause.
I did not. Okay. And what about as to the rape that allegedly occurred on Saturday the 3rd? Did you do any investigation as to whether or not Mr. Strickland was home at the time that occurred? I did not. Okay. So, I'm not trying to be crass here, so don't take it the wrong way, but essentially the investigation consists of taking the alleged victim's report and just treating it as if it's factual and moving forward from there? In this case, yes. I don't think I have any other questions at this point.
Hold on to your questions, especially the question why. Only the liar can answer that question. I've settled on my why, and as the world's foremost authority on this case, I know the whole truth. You'll have to settle on your own truth as to why a person might lie about being raped. If you ask leading advocates, and apparently some statisticians, tales of false allegations of sexual assault are so minuscule that they are referred to as nearly non-existent. So they, these opportunists, and I say criminals themselves, lying about domestic violence statistics against men, covering up crimes, even arresting actual victims, exacerbating the victim's trauma, they go one step further in their denial of an individual's dignity and justice, and they call him a myth. In part through this documentary, I am attempting to dispel the nefarious notion that false allegations of sexual assault are a myth. Because, after all, I'm not a myth. Now, as for the state's hand in this, there are definite reasons to know why they would choose not to prosecute one of these liars, especially when the evidence of wrongdoing is so simply derived and a victim is clearly evident. Why would the good guys choose not to pursue that criminal? For me, it's not just the whys, but the what's and the who's that factor in. Perhaps we should start with the question of what is a good guy, and then follow up with what is a victim. Since I've settled on my why with regard to my abuser's motives, the why police, then a prosecution, would pursue a case with no evidence and then erroneously accept a victim account that isn't believable, let alone possible, has to have an answer. Consequently, my life is devastated and my emotional decline is so steep it's more like a death plunge. I wanted to die. The idea still welcomes me. I went into a dark depression that continues today. Blame it on whatever and say what you will about this path I've chosen, about how it's worse for me. A path culminating with this attempt to tell my story through video. But I just can't let go of the why they wouldn't listen to me. The why the 30 years it took to outlive my first 20 didn't matter anymore. My entire fatherhood, all my triumphs and accomplishments didn't matter anymore. Today I think I'm just supposed to be happy that I didn't go to prison, pick up my life and move on, as if. Something must be done about what our public officials are doing to husbands, fathers, brothers, and sons, because the idea that a woman would be falsely accused of sexual assault by a man is so unlikely that I would call it a myth. And thus we need not concern ourselves with this eventuality. That wouldn't be right either. It seems to me that not all cops and courts look at all laws the same. They should, but they don't. Personal bias could be one reason. The department or precinct culture might be another. Leadership, overzealous advocating. I've concluded that in tales of sexual assault, they apply the laws circumstantially, based on what the crime is, who allegedly committed it, who the alleged victim is, what evidence may be available, which they can choose to look at or not, and the suspect's ability to fight for his freedom, also known as does he have aligned money. A suspect of little means and or social support, innocent or not, is a ready-made plea bargain. Just add fear. That is, unless his name is Kevin Strickland. What's the saying? If not me, then who? In my little brain, no evidence equals no case. No charges, no time, no nothing. Because after all, what would you base probable cause on? The answer to that question, I found, is actually testicles. If you've got them, they got you. Testicles equal probable cause. And how do you justify taking the freedom of an American based on a person with a significant motive to lie? Which, coincidentally, there are documented reasons why women lie about being raped. Divorces and custody battles top that list. Mental illness is another. However, one of the most contributing factors as to why women who would lie do lie is that they see others routinely get away with it. And their lawyers tell them to. It's called the silver bullet technique, and it's almost fail-proof. Female networks share that information amongst themselves, and who could blame them, because after all, you are trying to take a child or children in a custody matter. They all put themselves in a place of that threatened mother, and the establishment holds firm. Crisis centers for domestic violence victims facilitate all that. Illegally, I'll add, as they openly discriminate against men in need of the same services. I stand as proof of that. It makes sense that women might lie for leverage in such matters. A good officer might pursue charges with such rich evidence of the perpetrator's innocence and of the alleged victim's dishonesty. Seems reasonable, right? Not if you are Chief Steve Crown of the Wenatchee Police Department. Hell, his officers don't even bother to talk to you. I mean, a woman can't say she was raped and have a guy arrested, can she? Are words alone evidence enough? For a good investigator, there possibly would be proof that the victim was being dishonest. Proof that supports the notion as to why she would lie, right? Only words as evidence of a rape? Would that be good enough if it was your son who were standing accused? In your opinion, would it then be okay to arrest on words if it was your daughter saying it? Well, every woman is somebody's daughter, and they are treated as such, and every suspect is a monster because, after all, why would she lie? What kind of garbage human lies about being raped? Oh yeah. Well, what kind of people make wrongful arrests using a false victim narrative, and even helping shore up victim statements by adding words of their own so that they would better pass a sniff test? You couldn't, as an investigator, take victim statements, establish some timelines and the acts committed within those timelines, compare it against later contradictory statements about the timeline by the same victim, and not conclude that a lie was told. Prosecutors are masters at rooting out liars, aren't they? Detectives who follow investigative procedures save time and money by limiting themselves to the most basic inquiries, asking questions such as where, when, what, and with who. Those 4 questions could have solved this case within the hour of my arrest. Then they could have turned around and arrested the real assailant in this case, the fake victim, a real-life domestic abuser, my now ex-wife. However, instead of recognizing the errors of a few officers, the cops and the courts doubled down and continued to try and get me to plea bargain, which was my defense attorney's sole objective throughout her reign. Me signing a plea bargain would clear them all, including my defense attorney, of any wrongdoing.
Son.
And my defense attorney needs to be cleared of wrongdoing. And I'll get to her, that animal, Sunshine Paula Quinn.
You got.
If I don't object, the authorities proceed having nothing to fear. The city of Wenatchee, Strickland County, and thus the state continue to use lies and misuse laws to attack their own citizens. They systematically create and corral suspects in an enclosure of fear that appears to the weak-minded as if they have but one choice, and that is to head down the chute. I will describe for you all the ways they tried to intimidate me in order to get me to make that choice so that they could convict me. Their efforts failed because of who I am and because of what kind of man I am. But as I say that, you shouldn't confuse that with any kind of victory. This case has consumed me. It nearly took my life, and it leaves me under threat still today. My not pleading to crimes I didn't commit is that principle that fucked up business as usual for this ring. By the way, I have no sympathy for people who plead guilty to crimes they are innocent of. For the state, no plea leaves questions of guilt. Conversely, no plea leaves room for the notion that the suspect was innocent all along. It also leaves room for questions like, why didn't the charges get dropped once they knew the case was compromised by a lying victim? I think it's because they knew they'd already violated my rights. They needed me to just feel lucky and go away. I want you to know who I am, but that can't be my focus. I want you to identify it quite simply. If you know a male, you should care about this. I am every guy.
These aren't females, they're geese.
97% of all cases end in a plea bargain. Obviously, not all those folks are guilty. Most are trying to escape fear of the worst. That leaves 3% who either fight their case in court or have it dismissed. Of those dismissals, a small percentage of them were provably innocent. Such a small percentage that there is no wonder that they get wrangled and corralled like the guilty. People like me, not guilty, people who won't accept guilt and are nowhere close enough to guilt to be threatened with a court case, leave the cops who are trying to frame folks, cops like Detective Jeff Ford of the Wenatchee Police Department, in a vulnerable position. If that less than 1% person, me, decides to pick up the fight where the state left off and chooses to continue toward the truth to find out how all went so wrong, that could pose a problem. How could I leave this unrecognized and unaffected for the next guy that falls suspect to this conviction machine? In a karmic kind of way, it would make me just as guilty of the crime. Using that frame of thinking, how could I ever free myself of the helplessness that torments me if I, like everybody else, do nothing for me? I am going public because the courts failed me. I have no faith in Strickland County's brand of justice or their willingness to rule in my favor, especially against their own, and especially since my wide-ranging accusations have them facilitating what I describe as a criminal production line. Strickland County Superior Court and the Wenatchee Outpost of the Stage Crisis Network, my court-appointed attorney at the Council for Defense, and finally the Police Department helped protect my abuser. In so doing, these elements violated my constitutional right to free speech and later my right to peaceful protest, and I'll get to that. Furthermore, branching out publicly protects me from retaliation, I hope. I believe bringing this to public awareness turns me into a whole different prospect where eradicating me could mean harming themselves. I have found the fatal flaw, I feel, that ends this practice, or at least puts a damper on what amounts to the trading of innocent lives for revenue. My aim is to unravel the mess that they made of the truth, at all cost. Chief Crown, when you threatened me in private, I was so oblivious to that even being a possibility that even though I recognized your agitation in that moment, the fact that you had threatened me didn't dawn on me until after I left our meeting. My reflections actually clued me in to what I was dealing with here. I asked myself the question, why would he make such a desperate move and threaten me over my case? It certainly isn't part of some noble pursuit to catch a bad guy. I believe it is because he recognized me as something I didn't at the time, a virus. If I didn't lay it down and be happy with my freedom, I could pose future problems for him and his people. But go ahead, call me a virus, and then show the power of the people and make my account go viral. In closing, I just want people to know the truth and for the criminals who robbed me of my life over the past 2.5 years to face justice. Whatever that looks like.
These are some of the original signs that I created and went out on the streets with. These are the ones I was using when I got my fake trespassing citation, where they scared me off of the premises so that I would not draw any more attention there. Told me that I would get a trespassing charge. And it turns out there's no copy of that. They just scared me away from protesting, which is a violation of my constitutional right to peaceful protest and freedom of speech and all that stuff. They did it through threat of punishment. So yeah, that's it. Detective Ward framed me. Yeah, I got stopped by the cops and they read these signs, took pictures, and yeah, a lot of work went into them. But like I said, it was therapeutic. Helped me get past some anger. And now I have enough to have a protesting party and nobody to go protest with. I'm telling you, this is a one-man show of force.
Are you going to try and send me to prison for what happened last Saturday? Sorry, bear with me. This is Ashley's original victim statement wherein she says he grabbed me by my throat and squeezed, asking if I was going to try and put him in prison for what happened last Saturday. I pushed his arm away and he released my throat. The word quickly is not in there. Also, you'll notice there's nothing about who left the home first. This is Detective Ward's statement. You'll see there highlighted in yellow how he says Kevin grabbed Ashley by the throat. Are you going to try and put me in prison? And then Ashley pushed Kevin's hand away quickly. Down there in the middle there in the pink it says Kevin left the residence and Ashley came to the police station. She never says that. Down at the bottom it says that she spent the night in her daughter's room because she and Kevin had been arguing all night. She changes that later. And if you're at all interested, this is her basic description of the rape. This is probably the only place you're going to see this in the story. So, this is the arresting officer's statement, Officer Bakey. This was written a day after Detective Ward's, but it says the same thing word for word about going to prison and pushing the hand away quickly. Also, Kevin left the residence before Ashley. Here you're going to hear Ashley in open court contradict the statement of the two police officers about having said who left the house before.
Did you tell that police officer that I left and then you left?
No, I told the police officer that I'm here and I don't really know where you were, but you said that you were leaving to drop off resumes and applications, so I didn't know where you were.
So what I'm telling you is that Ashley admits that she never said that I'd left the home. Both police officers say that. That had to be important to them. So, and the only reason I could imagine is it was to make their story sound more believable, that this abusive guy did not let his abused wife, a recently abused wife, leave first. And that's important, and that's how they structured their argument.
Last question, I promise. When I was leaving, or when you were, after that argument in the shower, and you were pulling out of the driveway, and I was standing on the porch, what did you say to me? As you were pulling out, and I'm standing on the porch, what did you say to me?
It was in a response to what you said. And I responded, if I were you, I would worry. That's what I said.
Why is that a big deal? Because that's a long-ass statement. Are you going to try and send me to prison for what I did to you last Saturday? Even saying that quickly makes it too late for her to slap my hand away quickly. Okay? But they realize that who sits there with a hand around their neck, if they can help it, while the man says a sentence that takes 2 seconds to say? Nobody. It's ridiculous. So they had to add the word quickly. Okay? That's just another little way as how they were going to try and mold the case, so it was just a little bit more believable. Okay, this next group of papers is the timeline that I wrote very early on in this case, tracking my movements, remembering everything that happened during the times that she said she was being assaulted. So I wrote this. Ashley later confirms this with her own statements. But this is exactly what happened on the morning of September 3rd, when my wife says that I was raping her. I just want to point out the detail on the links that I went to in order to show my side of the story, wherein the evidence that she presented that I was a rapist and a domestic abuser was pales in comparison. This shows a little bit more detail of what happened that morning, but remember, this is not me trying to prove that my wife lied, and that this is me showing you how the police lied and framed the information in order to make their case stick. The fact of the matter is I brought my evidence and my argument to the courtroom, and anybody could do anything about it, didn't do anything. I have to carry on a relationship with my children's mother, so that's done. But now I've turned my sights towards the authorities and their practice of convicting innocent men on bogus charges. I've been relentless in my attempts to share my story, and I will not be discouraged. What really would have helped me in my case would have been some sort of evidence right away that could support me, such as video of me working, or pictures of me with the family that says that they were with me. All those sorts of things would have been very beneficial to me. Probably not as beneficial as if the detectives had just asked me where was I, what was I doing, or who was I with. I could have showed them something like the videos you're watching now, or I could have had them talk to the people who wrote these declarations here, saying where I was and who I was with. Would have been so helpful if I had done that, and if they had just done their job. It's just not how things worked out. Here's me reflecting on a job well done. Here's me enjoying my favorite beverage after a hard day's work. What kind of cop could be so indifferent that they would imprison a citizen without due process or just cause? What kind of person would do that? Well, allow me to introduce you to Officer Jeff Ward. After a couple particularly intrusive public records requests, I was able to get into emails and that sort of thing, and found some interesting documents on Detective Ward's history. What you are looking at here is just what it says, Wenatchee Police Department's annual evaluation form. This is for 2013, Officer Jeff Ward. It shows his hire date of June 15, 1999. Sergeant Sheree Smith is the evaluating officer. Remember that name. As you can see, he needs some improvement, professionalism, cooperation. Officer Ward had 14 years of experience under his belt when this evaluation was done. And you can see there it says, more detailed reports, proofread carefully. Lower your eyes to the commentary of the highlighted area where it says, Officer Ward expresses frustration about many aspects of his job. He has commented that he hates his job, and it shows. He appears to be very unhappy at Wenatchee Police Department, and he voices his dislike often. His comments disrupt the cohesion of the shift and making working in the reported writing room difficult. Officer Ward has made it very clear to me that he does not trust the administration of our department. Now, there's some very interesting stuff here in the middle about an accident and an incident in court where he was caught lying. But look at the bottom where it says, in early November, Officer Ward told me that he intended to do as little work as possible. Okay. That says it all right there. That is why I met the fate I did. So I just want to touch on that accident that led to Jeff Ward going to court and being caught lying and being asked to leave the courtroom by the judge. What happened was this. Detective Ward was at Stan Mary's Mart, and he was pulling out of the parking lot during rush hour traffic. You know how it is in Wenatchee. So the cars are just lined up. Instead of going out to the light and waiting for it to turn green and taking a left onto the busy street, he decides he wants to go through the backed up traffic that's already standing still. So he gets these people to actually stop and scoot and do all this shit so he can squeeze through these 2 lanes of traffic to get to the other side. It's a complete asshole move. Well, as he's going through, because they let him do it, another car comes by going into the turn lane, and Ward clips him. All right, Ward throws on his siren and goes and pulls that kid over and gives him a ticket for reckless driving. Turns out the kid had no license, no insurance, all that shit. Sheree Smith, the one that did that evaluation, comes and she tickets the kid because she takes Jeff Ward's word for it. The next day, she looks at the dash cam. She sees, well, it's clearly Ward's fault, right? So she asks the prosecuting attorney to drop the charges. Of course, this leads to a bunch of shit. Well, the kid takes him to court. He ends up getting like a no license or anything, but the case gets dropped because Ward lied about what he did. He lied about it being the kid's fault. I mean, it was obvious. So, being that he was caught being dishonest in the line of duty, he should have been put on something called a Brady list. And every county keeps those, and those are for a list of cops who have been found to be dishonest in the line of duty. And the reason that's important is obvious, because any case they're involved in becomes questionable if their integrity is in question. So, you know, nobody wants to be on that Brady list. He should have been on that Brady list. And not to mention, he was in 8 accidents in 13 years. He should have gotten more than just a driving, reprimand or something like that. He should have been put on the Brady list. But that's Wenatchee Police Department's way of disciplining his cops. Just cover it up, make it go away. Long story short, there was finally a break in the case about 8 months in when I fired Sunshine Poliquin and hired Tim Hall out of Yakima. Tim made all the difference for me. While it wasn't necessary, one of the things that he thought would be helpful would be if I would voluntarily take a lie detector test, which I did, and we actually used Chelan County's polygraph expert. And here are the results of that. In my opinion, at the very least, they should have tried to eliminate me as a suspect. But they don't have an incentive to do that. And so my question is, do they have an incentive to not eliminate me as a suspect?